We live in a fast-paced world. Everyone is in a hurry, stressed, and trying to accomplish everything in the shortest time possible. The world around us is changing rapidly, and technology is evolving at a pace that's hard to keep up with. In these conditions, people look for ways to cope, ways to avoid feeling overwhelmed by everything around them. They seek out quick escapes, brief moments to forget their problems. And here, we find ourselves at the gateway to addiction. Have you ever wondered why people get addicted? Whether it's to sugar, social media, or something more serious, addiction has a powerful hold over millions of lives. But what actually is addiction, and why is it so hard to break? Addiction is more than just a bad habit. It's a complex brain condition. When we talk about addiction, we're talking about a process where our brains become dependent on something to feel good or avoid discomfort. This something could be a substance, like alcohol or drugs, or even behaviors like gambling, gaming, or endlessly scrolling through social media. Take social media, for instance. How often do you reach for your phone to check notifications or scroll mindlessly? That little hit of engagement can create a cycle of dependence, where we need more likes, more comments, just to feel a little happier. At its core, addiction is when we repeatedly seek out something that gives us pleasure, even if it starts causing harm. But to understand why, we need to look deeper into our brains. Our brains are wired to seek pleasure. This is part of a system called the reward system, designed to motivate us to do things that help us survive, like eating, drinking, and socializing. When we do something that feels good, our brain releases a chemical called dopamine. This is often called the feel-good chemical, and it's the main player in the addiction process. Dopamine creates a sensation of pleasure, encouraging us to repeat whatever caused that feeling. But here's where things get tricky. Drugs, alcohol, and even activities like social media or video games can cause a massive release of dopamine, way more than normal. The brain starts to chase that high, craving more and more of whatever triggered it. Let's look at caffeine as another example. Caffeine gives a quick jolt of energy, which can be helpful. But over time, some people become dependent on it to function. Suddenly, that morning coffee isn't just a preference, it's a necessity. With time, the brain begins to adapt to these high levels of dopamine. It starts to become tolerant, meaning we need more of the substance or behavior to feel the same effect. This is why people might drink more, gamble more, or spend longer on their phones. They're chasing the same high that used to come easily. As tolerance builds, dependence can follow. This is when the brain starts to feel it needs the substance or behavior just to feel normal. Without it, people may experience withdrawal symptoms like anxiety, irritability, or even physical pain. This cycle of tolerance and dependence is what keeps addiction going. One of the hardest things about addiction is losing control. The brain's prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for decision-making, impulse control, and rational thinking, becomes compromised. Imagine trying to make a good decision when your brain is wired to crave that next dopamine hit. This is why, despite knowing the negative consequences, people with addiction often feel powerless to stop. The brain's reward system has essentially hijacked their ability to make rational choices. For example, a smoker might know the health risks, but the craving overrides their logical thinking, and they reach for another cigarette. It's not just brain chemistry at work. Our surroundings play a big role too. People are more likely to become addicted if they're in environments with high stress, trauma, or easy access to addictive substances. Social factors like peer pressure or even family history can increase susceptibility to addiction. Consider someone who turns to alcohol to cope with stress. What starts as a way to relax after a tough day can quickly spiral into a dependency. Many people turn to addictive behaviors as a way to cope with pain, stress, or boredom. Over time, these quick fixes for relief can become hardwired in the brain, making it even harder to resist. So, is addiction a life sentence? Thankfully, no. Recovery is possible, but it often requires a lot of support, understanding, and time. Rewiring the brain and breaking the habit cycle is challenging, but not impossible. Therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy, support groups, and sometimes medication can help people regain control over their lives. But perhaps one of the most important things for recovery is a strong support network, friends, family, or support groups that encourage healthy habits and accountability. Addiction is a complex interplay between our brain's reward system, our environment, and sometimes even genetics. It's not a matter of weak willpower. It's about understanding how our brains can be rewired to crave things that aren't always good for us. By learning more about how addiction works, We can take steps to protect ourselves and support others, whether it's being mindful about our habits or reaching out for help when needed. Understanding addiction is the first step toward breaking free from it. If you or someone you know is struggling with addiction, remember that recovery is possible. Addiction might be powerful, but so is the ability to change.